Yes. What's going on, everyone? And I am so excited about today. I'm excited about what God's doing in the life of the church. And honestly, I don't understand why most pastors and church leaders do not leverage technology for the glory of God. Pastors, church leaders, and faithful attendees who are looking at social networking sites like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn as evil, I believe I'm missing a great opportunity to reach people who are far away from God. Are you sitting? Because here's something that'll blow your mind. Christianity, our faith, in a very real sense, is the first technologically driven religion. Are you intrigued, angry, or frustrated? Check this out. Galilee, Bethlehem, and the rest of Palestine were part of the Roman world whose technological underpinnings had reached a level by Jesus' day that was not to be surpassed until the 19th century. That's right, those roads that the Apostle Paul and his associates traveled to spread the faith were unprecedented marvels of engineering. Check this out. Without those constructed roads that led from the streets where Jesus walked, the cities of Syria, Greece, Christianity might have remained another obscure Judean sect like those that fill the pages in the account by Jewish historian Josephus. Check this out. The roads were technological marvels, and we call them the original information superhighway. So what's the point? If Jesus, his disciples, or the Apostle Paul were here today, that's right, they'd use Facebook, they'd use Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other social media sites to reach people for God. Could you imagine Apostle Paul pulling out his MacBook Pro, updating his Facebook status with these words? Though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a servant to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those who are under the law, I become like one under the law, that I myself am not under the law, as to win those under the law. Those having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I become weak to win the weak. Become all things to all people, that I may possibly win some to Christ. And I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. And today, we have the opportunity to hear from who I believe has his finger on the pulse of the moment. In this series of podcasts we're calling What If They Don't Come Back Like We Thought That They Would. And I'm so excited about my brother. We're going to get into the introduction, people of God, because this brother, I know, has his finger on the pulse of the moment. This brother, without a shadow of a doubt, is changing the kingdom of God based upon all that God has placed in his life. Now, if at some point you hear something that's revolutionary, get out your pen, get out your notepad, because I want to make sure that you catch what's happening today. Now, at some point, you might want to sow a seed. I'm coming back to that later on in this podcast. But if you want to get a jump start, screenshot it. Take down this email address, because we want to be a blessing to this man of God tonight at KERVANCER at Yahoo. That's his Zelle. We want to make sure that we bless this man of God today, all right? Man, I can't wait. He's about to lay it down, and I'm going to introduce him formally, but we're talking about it. What if they don't come back like we thought that they would? What are you going to do, Pastor? What are you going to do, faith leader? And I've lined up a series of speakers who is going to take this to another level. But tonight is my guys' night, and I can't wait to get started. So while you're in the chat, do me a favor. Go ahead and let me know where you're watching this. Drop it in the chat. Where are you watching today's podcast? You don't have to give specific. You can give generalities. And then go ahead and start tagging every pastor you know, every faith leader you know. Tag them. Tell them to get on today, because we're going to drop knowledge. We're going to drop practical steps. And you need to hear from this modern day son of Issachar. Can you do that? Who knows what the church ought to do to plant a seed. And so without further ado, you all, let's get ready to go into today's show, and sit back and prepare to be blessed beyond your wildest imagination. Let's go, y'all. I'm excited about this new series of podcasts I'm calling What If They Don't Come Back Like We Thought? Welcome to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, a podcast about becoming 1% better every day. And now your host, yours truly, Clarence Stowers. Hey everyone, this is Clarence E. Stowers Jr., host of the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, a podcast about becoming 1% better every day so that you can level up in all areas of life. And I'm excited about this new series of podcasts I'm calling What If They Don't Come Back Like We Thought? And for those who are listening know or may not know, I am a pastor. I pastor the Morris Hill Baptist Church of Chicago. But since we are now almost 3 years into COVID, we call ourselves Morris Hill Anywhere. And that's reflected in our digital approach, in the revamping of our church app. And that app we nicknamed Church in Your Pocket. From there, you can access our sermons, our teachings, our calendar, and Bible reading, and be kept abreast as to what's happening in and around Morris Hill. The interviews I've scheduled have been on point, real, relevant, and raw. You're going to hear from some incredible leaders, both within the church as well as outside, to share their perspective on how we navigate not our new normal, but as Tom Rainer says, our new reality. Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Pastor Clarence E. Stowers Jr. Wait a minute. I'm using my professional name, this podcast land. This is Clarence E. Stowers Jr., the host of the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, a podcast all about becoming 1% better every day. This podcast focuses on inspiring and equipping highly motivated and creative people to take decisive action to level up in all areas of life while producing their best work. And I'm honored today to invite you and other thought leaders to this episode, this series of podcasts. And check this out. What if, ponder that, riddle that. What if they being church attendees, don't come back to our buildings in the fashion that we thought, and with this massive shift towards online events and conferences, services, and even comedian comic shows, we're in a shift, a seismic shift, a shift, no doubt, that is changing the course of church life, well, life in general, and we get a chance to talk about it today. And what excites me, and I've waited in anticipation for this moment, what excites me most about today's guest, my God, I want you to go ahead and get something to write with, something to write on. And you may need more than one page. You may need to stop what you're doing. You may need to pull the car over a walking, quote, machine. And what makes this walking quote machine so awesome and so inspiring is I get a chance to be a fan from a distance. And in being a fan from a distance, I've learned a lot about this brother. And what I've learned, you get the opportunity to learn today as well. So you know I'm teasing this out. So you know this has to be huge, you all. But this impactful, cutting edge, revolutionary pastor, check this out. Now this might give it away. Pastor of, now get this, innovation and technology. Man, I can't make this up, people of God. And what makes this even so special, his reputation as a leadership expert, marketing maven, international speaker, organizational development architect. This pastor of internet and innovation serves at one of the most influential churches throughout Christendom. And without further ado, we're going to dive into all that I've shared. Without further ado, people of God, I want to welcome to the podcast this brother, my maven, for lack of better terms, guiding us in all things internet and innovation. You all check it out, man. Welcome to the podcast, my friend, my brother, pastor of internet and innovation at the New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, Pastor Jamal Bryan. What's up, man? Kervance, what's up, brother?
Clarence Stowers, man, this is a dream come true.
Oh,
I get a chance to meet, engage, and converse with the man, the myth, and the legend. You're doing some super fantastic work at Mars Hill and in this digital space, and to be on your platform, sharing with the people that you impact, influence, and inspire is one that I can literally reshape, rewrite, and reconstruct my resume to say that now that I've been on the Leadership Coaching Podcast with the Clarence E. Stowers Jr., everything now takes off from here. So I'm excited, man. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh man, you are too kind. You're too kind, and I'm praying that I can live up to this, you all. And one of the things that really excites me is being now I'm considered the OG, the old dude, and I know I'm an anomaly in these internet streets, man. But I've learned. My father taught me at a very early age: find someone that you can glean from, who are two steps ahead of you. And he said, never be intimidated by age, because you can be 78 years old with the 1-year-old mentality. You just repeated that same mistake year after year. He said, get you some people who can keep you sharp. Get around some people that can keep you sharp, people that stretch you. And he's right. We have a mutual friend. Got to give a shout out to my brother, Pastor S.J. Stephen Thurston.
one of the greatest irritators and agitators of the world and the gospel. He's my brother. We're going over 2 decades of friendship.
Yeah, man.
And it's just, I literally would not be in some of the spaces, both in the marketplace and in ministry, without Stephen Thurston. So shout out to him. He's
Absolutely.
somebody I encourage anybody to follow. And he's the model of what friendship should look like in the dictionary. So that's my guy, and glad that we are mutually connected through him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We only are as rich as our relationships. And today I just became a deca millionaire. I hit that deca status. And so I thank God today. Man, let me do this. We know you in these internet spaces and innovation spaces and the work that you're doing globally with Meta and Facebook and Nona Jones and spaces as such. We're going to get to that. But, man, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother. Who is Kervance D. Ross?
Man, I like to be able to help people understand where you came from, so that people understand where you are and where you're going. I am a product of what I believe is the greatest city in the world, Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm from the West Side, Zone
All right.
1, day I died. I grew up in a place called Bankhead. And I grew up in this space between the streets and the sanctuary. My great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, and great aunt were all in the same house in the hood trying to raise one little boy. I found myself in an interesting space and paradigm in life where some kind of way God dropped me in a single parent home with a succession plan mindset, stuck in the middle of the hood with sanctification all wrapped into one. My dad, literally, I got a chance to meet him on a slab in Willie Watkins' funeral home about 5 years ago. He had committed suicide, hadn't heard his name, had never really interacted with him, understood the challenges he had had with mental health, understood the challenges he had had with drugs. But I found out that he was a preacher, had been ordained, had an amazing gift, but his moments, his circumstance, and his mind minimized him from his potential. In that same moment, I've got a praying great-grandmother, a lineage of preachers coming from her side, and grew up in a church that was at that time the mega church of that generation in the 80s and 90s. Grew up in a church in Atlanta called Salem Bible Church. At that time, it was Salem Baptist Church.
Oh, yeah.
And got to see mega ministry in a way that I don't really believe most parishioners should see it. But sometimes God puts you in spaces to expose you early so he can give you access later. And allowing both sides, the street, the sanctuary. I was a musician, literally wanted to be the drummer for Prince. When I grew up, I got through college on a band scholarship. Was the earliest ordained deacon at that time in church and was matriculating, had aspirations of the marketplace, believed in my heart that God was going to call me to preach, but he was going to take me through another path before I arrived at the pulpit. I went to Alabama A&M University, come back, and everything starts to shift for me. I have a desire to be an entrepreneur, but I'm afraid because I don't know any. Started working in the financial institution after getting a undergraduate in marketing, and go through a set of moments of being set up, being screwed, and being catapulted. In that moment, I was getting ready to get married after dating my then girlfriend for 7 years, had a plan, get ready to shift into it, and 3 months before marriage, I get terminated from my financial advisory job at Wachovia Bank. A woman who is transferred from Baltimore to Atlanta under the pretense that it was the DMV is now reporting to a hot young financial whippersnapper wearing gaiters and custom suits and gazelle glasses in the bank in the hood, not knowing any better, but succeeding, but was in front of the blessing. I was not prepared for what he had poured out, and she attacked me and told me in no uncertain terms, "You're the golden boy, and I'm going to get you fired today." And I've been looking for that woman for over 20 years, because if she hadn't done it, I wouldn't be where I am. That was one of the lessons that I learned, that sometimes God has to force you to leave it so that he can get you to where he wants you to be. And after trying to build my business, really was starting a marketing firm to help churches help their parishioners understand their purpose by allowing them to understand marketing, finance, and customer service, and ultimately be able to give back to the church, because the church created a template for them to operate in their purpose. And went in front of 3 to 5 pastors that I thought I knew pretty well, brought it to them, had partnerships with the bank, had partnerships with other entities that God sent my way, and they told me in no uncertain terms, "We're not interested in helping our people. You just show me how to help myself. Maybe I'll pass it on." And God told me to write my first book. I didn't even like to read at that time. Started setting it up, turns it into a publishing company, puts me back into the marketplace, go through a series of ups and downs, get married. And the first 8 years of my marriage, she's the only person that believed. But these first 8 years were like a episode of Tales from the Crypt. Because I couldn't get my bearings. Every time I'd make 2 steps forward, it was like I was making 20 steps backwards. I go through moments of extreme depression. Seriously thought about committing suicide because I didn't think it was going to work. And after this 8-year period, doing everything that I believe God had told me to do, get ready to get my house foreclosed on. And on a Friday at the end of June, on the 27th, about 1:58 in the evening or the afternoon, I said, "God, I'm following you. You told me to do this. If this doesn't work, your name and reputation is on the line. If I fail following you, you got your name here. You got to do something. I'll sleep in this truck, me and her, but you told me that I was supposed to go this route. I need you to move, and I need you to move now."
Yeah.
And in the next 2 minutes at 2:00, I got a call from a pastor who was getting ready to go to MegaFest. Said, "I can't stop thinking about you. I should have called you last week, but God just put you on my heart about 2 minutes ago. My marketing is in jeopardy, and I need to get to a certain space in the next 3 months. Effective immediately, you are the director of marketing for my ministry." And in 8 minutes, literally, God shifted everything in my life and promised me that I would never have a bill that I couldn't pay. I went through that process, learned some hard lessons in ministry, went through some amazing ups and downs, but I was on that road to being catapulted. And that's when he spoke to me about the fact that you're a kingmaker. You are the kingmaker, and it's your purpose in life to touch at least 1 billion people before you die and help them obtain their optimum level of purpose, greatness, and success. And I started working that, started cultivating my business, expanding it, and started to realize that I'm on this road towards ministry, but it's going to start in the marketplace. I started telling people, you know, you got to get your social media in order. You got to get your website in order. You got to get your image off of everything. You got to start working like the marketplace. And I started hitting entities, not knowing by default I was operating in the 7 kingdoms. And as I started shifting, God started blessing. And who knew that 8 years later, a guy that I had watched the first time I turned on the Word Network would be getting ready to move to Atlanta after doing a podcast just like me and you're doing. Did it 3 weeks ahead. And 3 weeks later, he was the new pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, and took some steps that I learned in the marketplace. God put me through a series of trials that particular year, from extreme health challenges where I lost the functionality of my right hand for 3 months, all the way down to watching me develop. And when we got to the end, God had already shifted the entire world to give me a platform. I just started preaching 3 years prior to that. And all of a sudden, he promised me that the time that it would take your predecessors will not be your same time frame.
Man.
I'm going to give you time travel. And December 31st, 2019, everybody thought that Jamal Bryant had completely lost his mind, introducing a pastor of internet and innovation, not recognizing that exactly 3 months later, the whole world would need one. And as a result, the struggles, the headaches, the strains of life all moved in my favor to get me where God wants me to be. And I sit here as the kingmaker, as the pastor of the largest church in the world, the internet, as the president of KDR Consulting, and a published author working on my 4th book with Clarence Stowers Jr., still trying to tell the world that it doesn't matter what you've gone through. God is literally writing the chapters to get you to the people, the place, and the platform that he wants you to be on.
My God, man, so much to unpack there. And I'm sitting like a kid in school on the first row and hearing your story to give us context. And people who know me know I like to put a frame around things, and that frame gives us understanding, and it brings out the beauty in the picture, the beauty in the story. A couple of things I want to drill down a little bit deeper on. You mentioned a couple of times your dad experiencing mental health challenges, and then you going through a season of mental health challenges as well.
Yeah.
And I'm interviewing. I have an interview scheduled with a good dear colleague. Her name is Reverend Dr. Ebony Only, and she mentioned that there is no post for African Americans, and the post being, we've heard the term post-traumatic stress disorder, because there is no post in the African American context.
Yeah.
She terms it as continuous traumatic stress disorder, and how we have moved and navigated from issue to issue, system to system. So we've never had a post.
Yeah.
And in hearing that, why do you think there's such a stigma in addressing mental health challenges?
Yeah, I think Alice Walker talks about the temple of our familiar. And it is that moment where we, based off of the stresses, the strains of this culture of slavery in the United States, or the yet to be United States of America, coming from a space where we were kings, priests, queens, individuals who shifted, shaped, and cultivated what we know now as this world. But in this spiritual space, we have been minimized to believe that there is no image of us, that this perspective of how God sees us is not covered in the Holy Writ. To the reality that when you have been made to believe that over a period of time, your power is not power, it's a problem. The psychology of what you hear and what you see affects what you say and what you do. In Proverbs, it is one of probably the most misquoted passages in all the Bible. It says, as a man thinketh, and most people stop there, but it says, in his heart, so is he. It is problematic because whether it is Moses, Solomon, or Amenetes, what you find is that it creates a biological quandary. because the heart doesn't really do any thinking. So really what this passage is trying to convey is that when you think, in the words of one of the greatest rappers of all times, he says, before it's in your heart, it's got to be in your mind first. Before you play your part, you got to read your lines first. And when he says this, he is giving us a precursor to Proverbs, because as a man thinketh, that's your psychology. In your heart, that's your cardiology. So it's he is your anthropology.
Jesus.
What is giving you the understanding that is how you think is what you believe. In your heart is how you behave. So is he or she is what you become. The problem that we face often is when you don't know what you believe, you don't know how to behave, you don't recognize what you can become. So many of us as men, particularly in the black context, we have twisted the coin onto the wrong side to believe that the attacks mean that I'm not valuable. Somebody has spent this much time trying to minimize you, trying to marginalize you, and trying to diminish you. You should really realize that you're so valuable that the moment that they believe you wake up and can think, to believe and behave, that you might just become. So why it continues to be an issue in our minds is because of the fact that the mind is this battlefield. It's the space that allows you to be creative. You can quickly recognize how anointed you are by how often the devil keeps you up at night. Because if he can keep you from dreaming and creating visions, he can keep you from moving to the place that the vision is supposed to be. It happens in the mind. So this is no coincidence that whoever does the logistics in the space of the province where Jesus is getting ready to be crucified, out of all of the hills and all of the mountains that they chose a place called the skull. That they literally put the cross and allow the blood by default to run on the places in my brain that will make me not see myself as healed, as delivered, and as well. And in this reality, I believe that we have to have theology and therapy. We have to have Christ and a couch. We need a priest and a psychologist. And in our stigma in our culture, we don't like to be seen as weak because we have been made to feel weak so many times that we don't want to put ourselves in that space. And I believe that now that we're hearing each other be honest and say, hey man, I've gone through these issues. I've been challenged. You got Jesus who is in the Garden of Gethsemane, that he's under so much stress that the sweat is galvanizing itself through pressure that it looks like drops of blood.
My God.
This is a level of stress, anxiety, and depression that you cannot minimize, to the point that Jesus says, if you can just let this thing pass and get this off of me, I'd be okay. You got Elijah who literally asked for a divine euthanasia, where I just need you to kill me and get me from this. Jeremiah is in such a bad place that he sits up under a tree and literally wants to die. And then there is a disciple who feels so guilty about his desire to be important and to gain margins in his finances, that when he gets his reality, his only result is to kill himself. It's not new to us. It's just the fact that we don't want to deal with it because of perceptions. But I believe that now we're in a season where I'd rather be healthy and taking a medication. I'd rather be balanced and getting a glass of wine. I'd rather be able to preach and turn around and have a scotch or a cognac because I've learned balance, and I'm not going to be confined to your perspective, so that I have some understanding of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that I don't force you to imprison me because of the escape that I don't want to have in my own mind. And because we're now at that space, it's a perpetual moment it doesn't have a stopping point. It doesn't have a post point. It's something that's got to keep going and continually develop so that we can change the genetic makeup of our entire ethnicity, gender, and culture.
My God, that has to be one of the most profound explanations of it's okay not to be okay. And in explaining it really gives imbalance and understanding that we tend to criticize what we don't understand.
Yeah.
And villainize it in such a way that it shames people into believing that this is who I am rather than this is what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you took the time to relate from those who are in Scripture, the breadcrumbs that have been left to help us to see and understand that as you say, you need theology, the right theology and the therapy, the priest and the psychologist, Christ and the couch. Man, that right there is worth its weight in gold. And for those who are taking this journey with us, you are hearing the voice of today. I believe this is one of the voices that's going to guide the church into its next season as we've left the church age and now entering into this next innovative meta age. But before we get to that, you mentioned, and I would be remiss in my duty if I did not circle back to this. My dad used to say, when I went away to college, he made sure that I attended an HBCU. He made sure of that. And he said, when you go there, he's Southern, he's from Covington, Tennessee.
Yes, sir.
And I leave Chicago and I head there. He said, now, son, this is what I want you to do. My dad was a pipe smoker.
Yes,
and
sir.
He had the pipe in the corner of his mouth, and he was look at me, old school, suspenders,
Yes,
three-piece suit every day. And he said, now I want you to go down south. And he said, I want you to get you a good girl. That's how he said it. A good girl, yes, a Southern girl.
Yes, sir.
And I didn't understand it then. And he said, the reason I want you to do that, he says, because Stowers men, we marry well. Yeah. We marry better than ourselves. Yeah. Not someone to compete with you, but someone to compliment you. And yes, during a difficult season in your life, you mentioned your wife.
Yeah.
And how she held you down, man. And I'm a firm believer that if you want to be great and go fast, go alone. But if you want to go further, go together. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's important. And I have to apologize on behalf of every preacher that ever told you that there was a biblical template for marriage. And I know that this is going to venture into territory unknown. But stay with me. I don't want you to bring just your emotions. I want you to bring your mind. Because when you think about the Bible from a marriage standpoint in the Old Testament, you literally have to be wealthy. You have to be in a position of authority, whether a monarch or a business owner that has amassed a certain amount. And there is no polygamy at this point, because as long as you can financially take care of them, you can avoid any sin of adultery, because as long as you married the person, it's not adultery. The flip side is in the New Testament, there's very little said about marriage. But when you do discuss it, you got a gentleman named Paul that's really saying, well, if you can't manage yourself and your own personal lust, I'd rather you get married so that you can take it out on somebody else, as opposed to just go willy-nilly and not be centralized and focused. And what I learned is marriage is one of those templates and motifs that God allows each one of us to customize it to fit the purpose that he has. It doesn't have one way of doing it, because how my great-great-grandmother did it, you could be 14, 15 years old, dating a 20-year-old man, get pregnant, you are now immediately married, and now you're trying to grow up together. The children get raised, and you realize we never loved each other, but we're in it now, and the culture says we got to stay. You got a situation where you got moments like my mom, where she was focused on building a professional life. And sometimes we get unequally yoked in moments with people that still allow us to birth destiny. And what I want to speak to people in this age that are asking, is marriage worth it? It is only worth it when you can learn from the lessons of yesterday, understand the call of your life on today, and then forecast with a divine understanding and a common sense perspective of where you see God taking you in the future, and make decisions on who you should be with now, henceforth, and forevermore. And this was a woman who I met at church. She'd been growing up in this same church that I grew up in, and I'd never seen her before. And we dated for 7 years. She's 4 years my junior, but she believed in me. She saw something in me. She had attributes that I didn't have, and I had strengths that were her weakness, and she had strengths that were my weakness. And what you have to find sometimes is somebody who believes in you when you don't have all of the details to the blueprint. And as we started making this thing happen, I had to work on components of me that were important. One of those components was I'm an only child. She's an only child. My mama's an only child. My grandmother's an only child. So I had to get into a space where I understood the responsibility of having somebody else in my space. I also had to work on communication, because that was a challenge that she had, and we worked on it together. It was not easy, but I realized it had business to it. It had spirituality to it. It had humanity to it. It had sociology to it. And this was the moment where I had to kind of, and I'm going to say this to every man that's listening to me, I had to diminish the voice of my mama, demise the voice of my wife. And this was the moments that started shifting. And in those 8 years, I shared stuff with her that I didn't share with anybody. I went through stuff where I watched her develop her spiritual footing, develop the anointing that God had for her, even develop through her own pain, her space that now she's an epidemiologist and a PhD for the CDC. This is a space that I can honestly say, Clarence, if it had not been for who I got connected to, you wouldn't be talking to me today. And I think it is so important to recognize that partnership is a parallel point of purpose. You partner with the wrong people, you're literally operating outside of your purpose, and you can gauge it, because when you're on purpose drive, you are picking up purposeful people. When you're outside of your purpose, you're picking up hitchhikers on a road that you're not even supposed to be traveling down. So it was literally about purpose. It was about connectivity. It was about sensitivity. It was about anointing. And now at 15 years of marriage and 7 years of dating, we haven't done it all right. I haven't been the greatest individual. I have made a lot of mistakes. I have made some indiscretions and some decisions that I've grown from. But this partnership is what kept me, along with God, from committing suicide, was what kept me from giving up, what kept me from throwing in the towel. And it's what keeps me being able to grow, go, and continue with God. So shouts out to Dr. Ross for sticking with a brother until he was in the space where God could continue to propel him and push him.
So rich. And man, I don't know if we're going to get to where we want to get to, but we're going to try to get to where we want to get to, because, brother, you are helping me. You blessing me. And I'm a fan of shows like Games of Thrones and watching these old kingdom establishments in Europe and Africa and all over the place, and they have a very different understanding of marriage. And like you said, not coming at it with emotion, but what I've learned from shows like Games of Thrones, etc., is they marry to consolidate power, expand power, all of the above, and to continue that legacy that it lives throughout, from generations throughout. We marry for different reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you took time to unpack and explain how the partnership, as you mentioned, as opposed to hitchhikers, and how that partnership elevated you to be where you are today. And I think that as the church begins to shift, perhaps our premarital counseling can shift in regards as well. And I'm glad you brought that up. But that gives me the opportunity also to pull over and take a pit stop on this journey that we're on and shift gears to the church today.
Yes,
and what I'd like to do at this particular moment, you had mentioned being hired to be the pastor of Internet and Innovation at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, and how you, prior to the pandemic hitting, Pastor Bryant was out of his mind and taking that step forward. And what I've learned, pioneers always take the first arrows in the back, because they're the ones who are paving the way for others to come. And I know that experience being under Pastor Jasper Williams in Atlanta and getting that mega church model. I purposely believe God never wastes a hurt. He never wastes an experience. And all of those experiences and pains are shaping us to be who we are today. And by being this pastor of innovation, internet and innovation, for those who may be unfamiliar with that term, what's the scope of your responsibility?
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting because, to my knowledge, up till December 31st of 2019, and I got to shout out the greatest church in the world, New Birth Cathedral, my senior pastor, my mentor, my big brother, Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant, and all of my pastoring partners on this team. I was aware that in the African American context, there had not been a template for a pastor of innovation. I've seen it in other ethnic contexts. We've had internet pastors in other contexts, but not so predominant in the African American space. And it was conjoined by this conjunction, where this is not social media management. For reality, it was a term that I had to cultivate, because he had the vision, but he recognized, and he said it in no uncertain terms, this is, God has your thumbprint on it. You got to make it work. And as I put it in place, it is a merger and a marriage of the marketplace, of ministry, and the mainstream. It is a connection between being futuristic, prophetic, and insightful on things that have to do with church, with technology, with innovation, and with spiritual destination. Kind of give some biblical background to it. Noah operates in this space, and many of us miss it. When you're around Genesis chapter 5, you are recognizing that God is shifting this moment for innovation, because the evil that he's talking about in this passage that most theologians and vacation Bible school teachers never talk about is that individuals had lived too long. You got people living 600 years, 700 years, 969. All of them are in the lineage of Noah. all of a sudden God says, because of the merging between the sons of God and the women on earth, that I got to get this evil out of the negative and get it back into the positive. Because get this, people don't know how to time themselves out. They don't know how to expire. They keep up too long. They don't know when to cut this off to start something else. So he finds a dude who is a farmer, an agricultural expert, who understands cattle, who understands pairing, who understands crops. And he says, I'm going to give you something because of how you think, how you're able to think even when you don't qualify. I'm going to give you a blueprint. I'm going to give you a blueprint that walks you through how to build a vessel to get people from how they have thought to where they need to think. I'm going to give you every single step. And this is the only time in Holy Writ where God gives somebody every step from beginning to end, and they don't have to ask any questions. He qualifies him, and then he gives him a resource that, based off of the King James Version, architects and geologists have not been able to find this type of wood, which implies that God, when he's pioneering a shift, will give you resources that are only customizable for you. And when now Noah is in this space, it's a generational shift, because it says for 120 years he's been preaching the same message. So he's gone through at least 5 generations, and he's shifting 5 generations to get on the same page. He's shifting builders, bridgers, baby boomers, Generation Y and Z. And he's saying, hey, the challenge I know that you have, that I have, is that I'm telling you it's going to rain overhead. And at this point, there has never been rain on the earth. Everything that they have done has been an underground sprinkler filtration system. He's shifting them technologically to operate with the cloud when all of their technology has been dial up and underground. And it's hard for them because they can't imagine something that doesn't give them the comfort of the success that they've had underneath their feet. Now you got to get into this space where Noah's saying, I don't believe that I've seen this. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know we can't stay where we are. The critical question that I had to ask myself when I was developing this is, could it be that God would have never destroyed the world by water, or that space of the world, if the people would have repented of the evil by now saying, I don't see it, I don't understand it, but I hear you, and I'm going to work with you to make the shift? What would have happened if the people would have started helping Noah build the ark, helping Noah get on the same page? I believe that God wouldn't have destroyed them, because they would have timed their old mindset out by connecting to something that they can't see with the potential of being better than what they've experienced. And this created the impetus behind internet and innovation. It is being the Steve Jobs of church, where I recognize that nobody knows they need an iPhone until I tell them, but I got to start with an iPod. I got to make sure that you put 3,000 songs in your pocket and get all of those CDs from off of your visor. And you say that doesn't make sense, but we building something, because once I get the iPod, we're going to go to the App Store. And I know you don't think that that's necessary, but now you don't do anything without an app. And once we get the App Store, it's all about because when I make you independent, when it's all about you understanding you, it's the same concept of getting on the plane. And when they give you the conditions before you take off, in the type of situation where we lose cabin pressure, I don't want you to try to help anybody until you first secure your own mask. And this internet and innovation space is forcing us to literally take this space called the internet and turn it into a platform, a campus, and a hub for fulfilling the Great Commission. But you're not going to do it just with the church. You're going to have to maximize all of the kingdom. So under my auspices, I got to make sure that social media is managed. I have to cross-pollinate and think about not just managing social media, I'm pastoring the internet. So I got to literally take some stuff that would happen in the physical space and move it to the digital space, where you would have ushers in the physical space. I have online greeters who will help cultivate how people are greeted when they're coming in on different platforms. You got to now be prayerful. You have to have some expertise in this field, not just be able to be a gospel preacher, but you need to have some backdrop in the marketplace as marketing. My undergrad is marketing. My MBA is marketing. You need somebody who can now understand leadership, because you're going to shift this and help people lead on a different platform. The innovation is now about innovating how you see where we're headed by understanding where we've been, looking at where we are, and then predicting where we're going to be. It is spiritual common sense in a prophetic futuristic space. So now you're pulling both of those things together, and it's not one role. It's one person overseeing the development of tiers underneath you. You say, well, that's not spiritual. I think we misunderstood the fact that when we talked about the rapture, which is not a word in the Bible, but its remnants caught up are there. We made this eschatological. I really believe it's existential, because it says to be caught up to meet him in the middle of the air. When you now go back and reach and realize that Satan, Lucifer, is the prince of the powers of the air. And then you now pull Matthew 16, and he tells Peter, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell won't prevail. Based off of the fact that he's talking to Peter, he's operating in the Roman space. The gates from Sodom and Gomorrah with Lot, we see it with David, we see it with Nehemiah. Gates are the spaces where decisions, government, finance are done at the gates. So what is happening is he's understanding and underscoring that where I'm getting ready to call you to, Judea, some of you are going to be regional, Samaria, some of you are going to be national. Here it is, and the uttermost parts of the world. I've only gone 290-mile radius in 3 years of ministry, and I'm charging you to do more than I've ever done. So when I get to this caught up in 2 Timothy, could it be that this is not about what's going to happen in the hereafter? Really, to be able to be caught up in the air is to be able to have people that operate in the kingdom that will catch us up, to be able to operate in the airwaves, in the clouds, to be where we need to be to reach the uttermost parts of the world. And even when some of these airwaves are negative because of the prince of the powers of the air, if you got people in the kingdom, in the 7 kingdoms in your ministry, in government, in finance, in family, in media, in entertainment, in church, if you got them in education, they can make laws, they can be innovative, they can turn negative into positive so that hell doesn't prevail and that you're caught up and you're not finding yourself saying, hey, I preach for you. I did all these conferences, and he's saying, depart from me, not in the hereafter, but because you won't catch up to, as the hymn says, to serve this present age, I'm forcing you to be departed. So this is a rapture moment. So this moment is allowing, as internet and innovation, for us to catch up on some of the stuff that we've overlooked. We're going to catch up on some of our bylaws, catch up on some of our policies, catch up on some of our fears, catch up on some of our hangups that said it was only TD Jakes, it was only New Birth and Jamal Bryant. There was only a handful that could be mega, and then the pandemic comes and all us mega because we all got the same tools. That's the impetus behind internet and innovation. It is pastoring a context, it's pastoring a culture, it's pastoring a future, it's pastoring an ability to catch us up so that we never have to catch up again. We can just keep riding and be comfortable making the adjustments, putting ourselves out of business, never having to be evil because we don't know how to expire, and meeting the Great Commission to serve the present age and reach the uttermost parts of the world.
My God, brother, you unpacked it in such a way that it's a historical yet theological and yet practical journey of this internet innovation space. And I kept thinking as you were sharing, I'm writing notes, and we both know change happens instantly. For example, I can take off my glasses and jacket and change my appearance, or I can shave off my facial hair in an instance. Change is physical and visible. Transition, on the other hand, is psychological and invisible. And you mentioned people not being able to expire themselves to ward off evil. Why do you think it's difficult today for pastors? Because I'm just amazed that we've all been given a mega platform. And people, pastors specifically, want to revert back to all things building as opposed to using this portal to take it to the gospel to the outermost parts of the world. Why do you think pastors, church leaders are having great difficulty transitioning?
I don't ever want to sound like a bludgeon of the past, because I have to take into consideration that you don't understand what pastors are going through until you've raised a child. Because when you raise a child, you can see them go through the infant stages, you can see the cultivation, you can see the passion, you can see the mistakes, you can see the growth. And for most pastors, they built their churches for 25, 30, 40, 50, some even 60 years. These are their children. They've been under this auspices. On top of that, it's generational, because you got to remember a lot of what we did, even in slavery, the pastor and the church were the conduits to create shift. Even in civil rights, when you wanted a movement, it birthed itself out of the church. The challenge is the church was, particularly in the African American context, growing, developing, and leading up until about 67, 69. Then all of a sudden, culture started shifting. We started kicking people out. Sam Cooke doesn't come to the church because we don't believe that he's using his gift for God. You have individuals that wrote songs like Precious Lord and Thomas Dorsey, who was told that we can't even sing that song in the church because the chords are evil. You started creating a mindset that separated people who have been called to the marketplace from the spaces of ministry. And some kind of way, technology took off, music took off, science took off, business took off, sociology took off, and the church stayed in 1969. In some kind of way, we kept growing the churches. We kept pulling people in. We saw development in how we were acting, cultivating, and reaching. But sometimes we became prisoners of our own problems, pain, and platforms. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves fighting internally when we were supposed to be partnering for external. And all of a sudden, now you're in this space where you're forced to shift and change instantly, but your transition was on pause. So now when this happens, the person that was fathering a kindergartner is now sitting back as a grandfather watching their children. And now you're taking the greatest tool from them, the sanctuary, for the first time in history. And it's jarring. You got to be sensitive to the fact that this is the first time in modern church history that the main tool that the church had was removed, the church. So now you literally got to go all the way back and start focusing in on providing service when we had created our own little kingdoms and started just being able to cultivate small kingdoms as opposed to going out and fulfilling the great mandate. It has a psychological, it goes back to that first question. It's a psychology, it's a shift in my thinking. Because a lot of us, all we wanted to do was pastor. All we wanted to do was have that credibility as a preacher, as that person in the community. It doesn't matter how many headaches went along with it. It came with a certain lore. And in the Black context, we have the ability with our gifts and our charisma and our talent and our style to move a crowd. We have ability to have an experience that doesn't look like any other ethnic space. And all of a sudden, you take my opportunity to be able to move the crowd with the amens, with the shouts, with the emotions and the fervor that comes in that space. And you force me to look at that camera. It becomes intimidating. It makes me feel as though I've missed the mark. It sometimes puts me in a place that I got to work harder because I've been on cruise control. And now you're in that space where you're shifting people who have sometimes in their mind come to the last mile of the way and get ready to cruise. And now they got to shift it back into third gear. There's so many moments and movements. On top of that, some of our churches have trustees or deacons who see themselves as the end all to how we operate, because we couldn't have a member if they didn't darken the doorway of the church at least 3 times a month. You're not considered a member by my bylaws. But now the people don't even come to our city. You got a culture that was cultivated in love, but now has sometimes become toxic in its liturgy, in its language, and in its reach. So it's so many moving parts that force it to be complicated when it's really simple. But simplicity, when there are so many other layers of culture, pain, growth, development, and financial investment, and get this, watering it over with the chocolate sauce of spirituality. Now you got a whole different ball of wax, because when you put that spiritual component in it, it's not just business anymore. It's not just a movement. It's not just an entity. It pulls that chemical cocktail and allows it to be explosive. And we got to take into the consideration that there's a lot of emotions, culture, tradition involved. And now when you now put those pieces in place, it forces us to rethink what we've thought. As William N. says, any individual who becomes the spouse of a current age will soon be the widow of the coming generation. We have forgot the hymn. We don't want to serve the present age. We just want to serve the past emotions, success, and traditions. So in that, it's not just, hey, beating up on the church saying, I don't see how you're not here. I do see how you could be called in not wanting to leave out of the sanctuary. I do see how this is the situation that puts us with our backs up against the wall. But I do see how we can't keep preaching what we don't believe. And if this is God's church, if God has given us this opportunity to make a shift, if he did something great the way we've done it in the past, have we ever considered that it's not even in the DNA of our holy God to make a seismic shift and then go back to the way he did it before he shifted? So we have to ask the question, are we following God, or are we following our culture? Are we following our circumstance? Are we following our reformations? We've got to now put ourselves out of the way, not forgetting, not being insensitive, but recognize that God is moving this thing, and we don't want to be off of a boat that God is already steering, being the conductor and the captain of, simply because we like what was happening on the shore, while we're headed to a much greater destination, opportunity, and paradise.
Oh my God, brother, man. This episode, I believe, is all about unpacking and understanding. So often we want to get to practical tips to implement without understanding the age that we're in now. It's a challenge, but it's not going to be solved in a linear fashion. You have so many components.
Yes.
That's causing this angst and anxiety. And I'm glad that you took time to explain why why our buildings are anchors of stability.
Yeah.
Because in a time of chaos, people are going to look for something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And by unpacking it in that way. So in our final last moments, I already know, man, I'm going to do everything I can to get you back again, because I want to get to some of the practical tips to help pastors and church leaders at a later time. But I really love this because it's unpacking and understanding. How would you help, or what would you say to help that pastor who, number one, understands that a shift is happening with or without permission? And then for those who are ready to make that move, who say, okay, I see it, I get it, I understand it, what advice would you give them going forward?
It's a difficult situation because I get this call, 10 or 12 times a day since the pandemic started March 15th of 2020. And I'm sensitive to the realities of pastors. I realize that there's a generation that says, hey, you don't understand what I'm going through. You ain't never been in these shoes. Don't tell me anything. And I think that is ASA 9, ASA 10, ASA 11, and ASA 12. Because in the consulting world, you don't have to be the CEO to come in and consult them on where they need to go. In almost every space in business, I don't have to own a Maserati to fix one. These are things that just come with partnership and success. What I want to share with that, Pastor, is to consider the successes that you have and the major shifts that you had to go through, implement, and curate for the success to be made. I'm still big on the fact that there is no such thing as a smooth mountain. Because it is impossible to climb one, and they don't even exist. What makes the climb adventurous for a mountain climber is the hard, rocky steps. So to that, Pastor, I'm saying use the same template for your success that was major and apply it to this moment. For that new pastor that's saying, hey, nobody told me the hell that I was getting ready to walk into as a successor. They painted a great picture for me, and I don't know if I can go and shake up the ship. This is not a moment to overlook the fact that the reason that they called you is that they needed a shift. But you definitely have to do it with wisdom. You have to do it with strategy. And you got to go in and understand the landscape of where you currently are. But in the process, you've got to bring some of your team, your mindset, and your individuals with you while cultivating and drawing those who are going to help you take it where it needs to be to the ministry. It's the same concept of football. I think Bill Parcells said it. You can't expect me to cook the meal if I can't shop for the groceries as well. It is that process. For the pastor who's in between that says, hey man, I got trustees, I got deacons, you have to appeal to their humanity while not just looking at their spirituality. If this is the case, I don't know any deacon or trustee who's married to a woman who they still operate the way they operated when they were dating. I don't know any deacon or trustee that's still driving the same car they were driving when they were struggling. I don't know any deacon or trustee who is at a job who never aspired to do better, never aspired to retire, never aspired to vacation. This is not about fighting their current circumstance. It's about getting them to focus on their potential opportunities. And many of them are in the time of life where it ain't all over, but it's definitely getting late in the evening. The sun is going down. You got to appeal to the fact that It may not be for you, but how do you want your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, your nieces and nephews? Do you want this space to die with you? And I think that is a challenge of us realizing as pastors, some of us don't have the marketplace expertise. We don't have the verbiage outside of our sermonic moment of spotlight. So what you got to do is you got to do something that I credit Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant with doing, and I wouldn't be here. And it's one of the key formulas of being pastor of internet and innovation at New Birth. You've got to be comfortable with enough with yourself to get out of the way. If Jamal Harrison Bryant had an ego issue, there's no way I could be on this platform. This is one of the key components that nobody ever talks about. You got to want it so bad that you will call people in that will put the pieces in place without you needing to always show your face. This is one of those moments that allows you to have to do a check, because there's nothing that has been taught in seminary, that has been taught at any institution of higher learning, that taught us how to lead in a pandemic. We're going to be the first people to be able to say in 100 years that I survived a pandemic. The only way that you're going to survive it in your ministry is that you got to be comfortable enough with yourself to pull people in who can do something that you have no other understanding of. And get this, you got to get in the system, not operate outside of it. This is going to be important, because you can't bring an expert in and then tell the expert what to do because you don't know how to do it. You've literally not got to, you cannot operate with a pyramid or a hierarchy model. You now got to create a spider web. The beauty of a spider web is you don't even pay attention when it's going up. You don't know where he started. You don't know where she stopped. You don't know where she created the moment. All you know is if you walk in it, you're going to get caught. This is the mindset of the shift. You've got to not be concerned about who gets the credit, where it starts, where they in church, where they members, how long have they been in the church? Can they help us further the cause? If this is the case, all you got to do is help people get caught. And the final piece is you got to invest. This is the hardest piece. Because we'll invest in custom suits, we'll invest in nice cars, we'll invest in nice homes, but we're afraid to invest in the furtherance of our technology. It don't take all of that. Well, the Barna Group through Givelify has taught us that in the pandemic, that the greatest giving day is no longer on Sunday. It is now Friday. They recognize that your service may not even need to be at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, because your target through analytics and data may tell you that your target market shows up on Thursday at 6. You cannot be in this space where you won't invest in the data, you won't invest in the resources, you won't invest in the development, you won't invest in your young adults, you won't invest in your community, and get this, you won't invest into shifting your church from just a once a week shouting location to a 7-day-a-week development, revenue, and stream of community change. As you start looking at that, you now have to reshape what you believe, help reshape the perspectives of the team around you, bring people in from the outside that will further it, and then cultivate a team that allows your personal perspective of self to be removed so that the glory of God is revealed, and that the agenda for reaching the masses, men of every birth, is put on the forefront. And you'll always get the glory. You'll always have your name called. You'll always be blessed. You'll always be changed, and you'll never be forgotten. But you can't be fearful. You can't keep second guessing. He who hesitates is still lost. This is that moment. That's what I would tell that pastor. And if you're on that road to start moving, let us help you, and we'll be more than helpful, glad, and honored to push you in that direction.
There you have it. My God, man, I want to add to your moniker in your bio, and of course, all the information and how to connect with Pastor Kervance will be in the show notes, links as well. And already know this is going to be one of the historical episodes. And I just thank God for this opportunity to converse, to learn, and to share. So in addition to the moniker that's listed in your bio, man, you are a hope dealer, life giver. And that's how I'm going to refer, man. This is my hope dealer, life giver, because you've given life for those who may have been wandering in the wilderness. And I thank God for you. And I thank God for this moment and this opportunity. And it's just amazing because you think it's going to go one way. And this is why it's always good to leave space for the Spirit. And in leaving space for the Spirit, we had a plan. We were going to talk about churches' life cycles and life before COVID and how attendance was already dwindling. We were going to talk about what to measure in regards to all things online. But I love how the Spirit shifted our conversation to get context. So think of today as putting a frame around where we are so that we can position ourselves on where we're going. And man, I'd love to get on your calendar again as a part 2 and deal with some of the more practical things. But I'd like to conclude our conversation today with a question. What are you reading that's challenging or changing you?
Before I get into that, I just wanted to let you know, Clarence Stowers Jr., I am honored that God is using you to create airways for conversation, dialogue, insight, and inspiration that changes so many generations, and your voice will be chronicled even when you're no longer here. To be in this space to create a brotherhood and to be cultivated and impacted by your excellence. My hat's off to you. And to be honest with you, you can call me and ask me to read announcements. I'm going to show up. I'm here for it. And you are now my brother from another mother that you can't get rid of. So thank you. And the answer is yes. I'm reading a couple of things. I just started a book, Reality, Grief, Hope, The Urgent Prophetic Task by Walter Brueggemann. I am reading a leadership book called Lincoln on Leadership by Donald T. Phillips, where he looks at the executive strategies for tough times by chronicling Abraham Lincoln's journey. And I'm reading a book called Paid to Think. I forget the author's name, but it has shifted my total perspective of ministry, marketplace, and life. And I encourage everybody who can to purchase, if you got to buy one out of the 3, Paid to Think will definitely shift your life.
Well, praise God. And I'm headed to Amazon right after this because I'm a believer that, of course, leaders are readers. And man, it's been such an inspiration. I've been stretched. I'm challenged, and I walked away today with hope, but also walked away today with more questions. And and of course, man, that's how we grow. The questions begin to shape our reality. So with that stated, I just want to thank you once again, my brother, for imparting wisdom, helping us put a frame around this current picture so that we could position ourselves to lead effectively, not just today, but each and every day. And I can't wait to see the response. And of course, all the information for Pastor Ross will be in the show notes, and encourage you not only to purchase the books he mentioned, but his books that he's written. We'll have links in the show notes to that as well. And perhaps next time, after we get past some of the practical things, man, I just want to get a peep between that conversation, not the one that's recorded, but the backroom conversations you having with Nona Jones, man. I'm telling you, I know it, man.
Talk about it.
Cool then. All right. There you have it, people. Pastor Kervance Ross, pastor of Internet and Innovation at the New Birth Missionary Baptist Church. And it's a treat and a wonder to have him for such a time as this. Until the next time, thank you for listening to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast. Well, it's all about getting 1% better every day. See you next time.
You've been
listening. My God, y'all. Ooh, man, I tell you, Pastor Kervance D. Ross, modern day son of Issachar. Man, I tell you, I am so blessed that God has positioned me to move in certain spaces. And had it not been for our mutual friend, Pastor Stephen J. Thurston, who hooked us up, and man, I am indebted to that brother. My dad always said, get someone who's a little bit younger than you, who knows more than you, that can kind of guide you on the way. And I'm not ashamed to say I have friends in spaces and places who are younger but yet wise. I tell you, man, that was a phenomenal conversation, and he will be back. But in the meantime, I'd like for you all to do something for me, man. I told Pastor Ross that I have some people who are very generous, and you received a master class today, and he's coming back, and I want to make him feel welcome. So if you don't mind, man, let's sow some seeds to let Pastor Ross know how much he means to us. You can do it through Zelle at Kervance, Kervance, and the letter R as in Rover, KervanceR at yahoo.com. Also, if you want to get a jump start on the books he mentioned, you can visit his website at www.thekingmakersclub.com. And I'm excited because he's coming along to coach me. That's right. And I know I'm pretty gifted in some things, but hey, game recognizes game. And I can't wait to be a client and to become under the auspices of the Kingmaker. So you can make sure you go and check that out as well. So let's come on, sow a good seed and let my brother, Pastor Kervance Ross, know. And then also, before we cut out, he did mention a book, and man, I cast the vision of the need out to our membership during our Bible study, during the gathering on yesterday. And the book he mentioned, called Paid to Think, the author's name is David Goldsmith. David Goldsmith, that's the author's name. And I had a gracious member who, after the stream, because I didn't want to be a burden on our church, said, hey, Pastor, what are the books that you mentioned? My husband and I, we want to be a blessing. And I bought my books today. So Pastor Ross, I got my book, Paid to Think, Lincoln on Leadership, and that piece by Walter Brueggemann, man. So thank you, brother. So with that stated, man, this is the first in a series of podcasts. And I want to make sure that you save these dates. Save these dates. Man, on March 3rd, I have my friend, Reverend Dr. Ebony Only. She's going to come, pastors, and help you to minister to those who are in your pews. Man, it's quite different than what we experience. So she's going to deal with trauma in the pews. And man, she's a phenomenal leader, phenomenal preacher. And I just thank God. And then on the 10th, Pastor Marvin Williams, mega church pastor in the state of Michigan, leading a diverse congregation. And then we're going to close it with my brother, Reverend Dr. Montel Crawford out of Kankakee, Illinois, man. So come on, let's make sure we show Pastor Ross some love, fam. And until the next time, I can't wait to see you again. Let me know in the comments how you were blessed today. Let me know if you have any questions or anything that you want me to cover. Let me know if there are any other phenomenal and incredible leaders who are out there doing a wonderful job that we can invite them to be a part of the podcast. Now, the audio of this podcast today is now available on your favorite podcast platform. You can go to Apple Podcast. You can go to Google Podcast. You can go to Spotify. Type in the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, and you'll be able to hear the audio of this podcast. So until next time, I can't wait to see you next time. Take care. Go back and listen. And I can't wait to see the incredible work God is doing in your church, your business, and your lives. Thank you, Pastor Kervance D. Ross, for exploring the possibilities of what can happen when we totally yield ourselves to God. See you all next week, same time. Reverend Dr. Ebony Only. Let's do this, y'all.